Well, hello there, this is Circle 30 coming at you from North Remembers, with today a quick guide to protect your Town Hall 9 base against Valkyries. An ever-relevant troop to the Town Hall 9 game, hasn't been at the forefront of the meta for a while, but Govaho and its variants are an extremely stable and reliable family of 3-star strategies, so you can never really go too far wrong equipping your base to defend them, and more specifically, heavy kill squads that are based around them. This guide will be similar in structure to the anti-HGHB guide I made approximately a month ago, but before I begin diving into lots of different subsections, most of the tips I'm about to share link back into some common knowledge about Volks and more specifically how they path, so that's what I'll share first. To cut to the chase a little here, since Valkyries do damage to any structures they're standing up against, there is a part of their AI that slightly preferentiates towards adjacent structures. I did do some research on this, but to be honest with you, it completely failed, so I'm unable to give you any tile numbers or anything like that, but nonetheless, many of the tips to follow will be based around this idea that you can anticipate Valkyrie pathing based mostly on structure adjacency. As with the anti-HGHB guide, I have a skeleton base cooked for examples, so without further ado, here goes. As an obvious first extension to this theme, you can use structure adjacency to lure Volks away from likely paths that the attacker would use. For example, on this skeleton base, any attacker that enters at 1 o'clock can bet on their Volks being pathed swiftly upwards to 12 and then around to 11 on the opposite side of the base to the Queen. But the subtlety of these particular adjacent structures runs slightly deeper than this. To illustrate this, I went out into multiplayer and found these collectors with a hut by them. Nothing remarkable at first, but deploying a couple of Volks on these structures demonstrates a further nuance of Volk AI, and that is, even if two adjacent structures have differing numbers of hit points, even if the first structure of the two falls near instantly as with the builder hut there, the Volks will continue to attack the higher hit point structure before moving on to a different building. So, compared to the Volks on the left of that replay, the Volks on the right have spent the same length of time on buildings, but have destroyed more hit points. Hence, it follows that the most efficient way to lay out adjacent structures for Volks to follow is to alternate between buildings with high hit points and buildings with low hit points. For example, here at 11 we've got a storage, a hut, a collector, a Tesla, and then a mine. The Volks will start between the storage and the hut, they'll take the hut instantly, but they won't move on to the collector until they finish the storage. Since the Volks would have spent the same time taking out two adjacent storages, you've potentially saved yourself about 1700 hit points by using a builder hut instead. Looking around the base, we find that this method of hit point distribution is actually pretty commonplace, with further examples in the trash ring at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock showing how to draw Volks around the base while simultaneously limiting the value that they get from the 360-degree attack radius as much as possible. For the ultimate troll factor, you can use Teslas in these chains of buildings, or simply to create adjacent structures where the attacker couldn't see them, which can sometimes completely ruin a Volk attack. One of the main properties of a base that an attacker looks for when choosing to bring Volks is the way that the compartments are arranged, and by and large, a Volk attacker is generally pretty happy if he can guarantee a smooth path to the Queen from a different side of the base. Hence, your job as a defender is to minimise the number of these paths, and straight away a good tip to follow is using long, thin compartments, particularly those that force a jump spell to open up multiple compartments. While at first it seems like an easy task to throw Valkyries down the long slender CC compartment here, you actually cannot jump or break into the compartment without opening another compartment next to it, either here or here, which would rather probably cause Volks to split into them and start losing their effectiveness quite rapidly. Illustrating this concept beautifully, I have a failed attack replaying here from a random guy called Circle 30. If you look carefully on the right, you can see a Queen charge getting roasted by an air defense. Meanwhile, at the top of the base, we have a Volk entry here. I pretty badly misplaced my jump, and the Volks split really quite evenly into a few different compartments, meaning that the defending Queen could pick off the Volks a few at a time, and that really determined the outcome of that raid there, making Circle 30 very sad. Going back to the skeleton base here, one way to get around this if you wanted to come with Volks from that angle is to double jump like so, since it is completely possible to jump over the intersection between the bows and guarantee that the Volks will take this double compartment corridor down to the Queen by not opening any compartments either side. But the attacker would first need to deal with adjacent structures at 8 o'clock, trying to pull them away, and also a late CC draw, so it remains easier said than done to use that corridor. While we're on the subject of wall structure, it's probably worth making a couple of comments specifically about dead zones. As you can see, there is a core dead zone in this base, and it has some pretty distinct pros and cons with respect to Volk attacks. As far as the pros go, mainly it discourages a Valkyrie attack from 2 o'clock or another similar angle, since it basically gives you two choices. You can either go around the dead zone to the right, get funneled into some spring traps and get only a small fraction of the base in general, or you can go around to the left and risk your Volks wandering into some god forbidden area of the base nowhere near your Queen. So going from that angle is a pretty hard sell. On the flip side, it makes coming in from 10 o'clock all the more appealing, since it virtually guarantees that Volks will behave themselves as they approach the Queen, so it's all the more important that entering at 10 initially is quite challenging. I suppose the crux of what I'm saying is be careful with how you use dead zones. If used correctly, they can completely nullify an angle of attack that would have been quite easy before, but you must mitigate the likely damage to another angle in some way, and whatever you do, do not fill the core of your base with a huge dead zone, thus turning your base into a huge ring. Appealing though it may be to prevent troops pathing through the core of your base, the lack of defences there is going to increase the survivability of any kill squad troops they bring, since they're only ever under attack by defences in front of them and none to the side, making troops such as Valkyries extremely durable. A quick theory crafting chapter on the defending Queen here. I actually covered some similar content in one of my earlier videos on suicide miners, but it remains extremely relevant here, so I will repeat it now. Observe this innocent looking 7x7 Queen chamber. But circle, I hear you cry, the Queen is clearly gonna jump the wall. And to you, I say, yes. And here's why that's okay. Currently, a large Valkyrie kill squad coming in from 10 o'clock, as previously discussed, would reach their air expo compartment, the Queen would aggro the Volks, and get swarmed shortly thereafter, but the difference is that they don't have to beat through the Queen chamber wall to reach her. So, if the attack wanted to get Volks into the Queen chamber and access the defences there, they have to bring an additional jump. This is in stark contrast to the situation where the Queen doesn't jump the wall, where you can in fact rely on the Queen to guide the Volks through the wall on their own, and a jump spell is not required. You can invest in an extra heal or rage spell instead, which makes all the difference when it would affect so many Valkyries at once. As a ground troop that is typically deployed in groups, the obvious choice for an anti-Valkyrie CC is a high DPS air splash unit. Since it's a bad idea to have Volks draw the CC on their own without tanks, one logical thing to do is to make the CC centralised and unlurable, and pack maybe balloons, or better yet, a dragon or a baby dragon, and that's okay, but you're not out of options yet since there's another thought process that I will guide you through now. As we discussed earlier, the most feasible entry for Volks on this base, for example, would be around 10 o'clock. So with this information, the CC here is slightly skewed back to delay the CC draw slightly further. This is mostly to avoid the typical sort of time that a CC is activated, which coincides with when the first rage or heal spells are going down on the kill squad to help them work through the base. Since this CC is slightly further back from that entry angle, it will deploy later and begin to attack the troops as the kill squad phase is beginning to fade out, making it more effective. But there's a trade-off here. As you push the CC more and more to one side, it becomes easier and easier to lure. So with a heavily offset CC, it would become quite easy to lure the troops out and drag them to the other side of the map before you begin your raid, or even, if it's a really easy lure, you could trigger it partway through your entry. There are two ways you can combat this with your CC composition, and the first way is simply to add some barge or goblins to your CC to make it expensive to get a full lure. This method is well documented already, but a word of caution. If your CC can be pulled by a balloon or two, it's very unwise to exclusively use goblins or barbs to delay, for example, a baby dragon, because goblins aren't going to be triggered by air units. So if you do this, make sure to also add some archers. This is all very well and good, but there is an alternative option, and that is to go to the other extreme, in fact, and use a CC golem. Controversial though golems are in the current meta, they remain an extremely effective counter to Valkyries. Firstly, dragging a golem from an offset CC to the other side of a base can take anywhere up to 30 or perhaps even 40 seconds off the start of a raid, and secondly, golem death explosions actually do an incredible amount of damage to Valkyries, to where they are only really left on 20% health. So in any practical scenario, a golem will in fact force a heal on Valkyries, beside wasting precious seconds of the raid as they break the golem down in the first place. Of course, this comes with a bit of a caveat. Do check that a CC golem can't be exploited by another strategy such as Pentalaloon or a dragon attack before applying it to your CC, as this can occasionally lead to some pretty disastrous results. As far as traps go for defending Valkyries, there aren't really too many cards you can play here. Bombs and giant bombs are pretty much wasted on them, as are ground skeleton traps for the most part because of the Valk's attack mechanism, but spring traps are pretty effective if you have them upgraded to level 2. Since Stoned Hobo is also pretty popular at the moment, it isn't always the best idea to call your springs specifically to defend Valks. But there is a lot to be said of making sure the springs in your base could work on Hogs or Valks, so you can't go too far wrong adhering to standard spring trap procedure for Hogs. So that's all the advice I've got to defend Valkyrie-based kill squads for today. If you have any questions or comments, of course leave them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer them. I'm also happy to remind you, you may have already seen his little announcement video earlier, but Zaza from North Awakens is going to be actually building some bases on the channel for you guys to take inspiration from. I think it's a great idea, to be honest. It's going to complement these strategy guides extremely well, and it will also satiate your thirst for base building content while I am busy doing other things, which I often am. One more thing I wanted to mention in this video, since I have the microphone here now, is to give a couple of opinions on the most recent balance changes that hit Clash of Clans just yesterday, and also what the Clash development team wants to do long term. I actually don't dislike the balancing. In particular, my opinion on the healer nerf is that it actually won't affect queen walking too severely because of the overwhelming threat of lava loon attacks on a base with peripheral seeking air mines. But the thing I really wanted to say is about the idea of introducing another defense. Now, I appreciate the overwhelming impact that mass attacks are having at the highest town hall levels, but the idea of introducing a new defense that targets, I quote, large groups of mid-sized units, I think is a little weird, simply because we already have one of those, and it's called the Mortar. I don't think the problem is that the defense doesn't exist. The Mortar is just absolutely terrible at its job. So, my suggestion to the developers moving forward is to change what the mortars are geared towards killing as you move through the game. At lower town hall levels, the mortar is fine because people barch a lot, but as you get to town halls 9 and above, you start grouping together not barch, but hogs, bowlers, and eventually miners. So as you upgrade the mortars as you progress through the game, its DPS should increase exponentially rather than linearly, to represent the change in things it's going to be firing at, and actually make it a consideration when you plan for bases, because I can't remember the last time I said to anyone that I was worried about a mortar killing my back-end troops. A controversial idea perhaps, but just wanted to put that out into the public eye, and that is going to do it for this video. Until next time, this is Circle 30 reminding you to stay frosty.